job analogy. And so, what I always say to families is that applying to a highly selective college or university really is like applying for a job. And that means that when you apply for a job, the first thing you always do, or at least I always do, is look at the position description. I think this is an apt analogy for parents, right? You look at that position description, number one, to ask yourself, do I actually want this job, right? Identifying what the responsibilities of that job is. And then the second question, assuming you want the position, is based on my experiences, can I contribute something of value to the position? I always say to my clients, my students, imagine for a moment that you're applying for a position as a lifeguard. And one of the qualifications that you would assume is that you're an excellent swimmer, right? You need to be a reasonably good swimmer to be a lifeguard. And as an applicant, you are a great swimmer. So check yes, right? But then the second qualification, if you were to look at the position description, would be that the applicant needed to be CPR certified. Now, if you are the applicant and you're not CPR certified, then you're almost immediately discounted from the consideration. And so when you're applying to college, it's important to recognize that, we might not have a position description, but the first question every single university is going to ask you is question number one, what college type are you applying to? And we'll talk about that in a moment. And then question number two, what is the prospective major under that college type? And although there's no position description, there are departmental descriptions, right? History and Spanish and archaeology, right? These are all departments at certain institutions, and they all have departmental descriptions. And you might know off the top of your head the difference between, the history department and the economics department, although I would bet you didn't really know exactly what's happening in those departments. You might have a sense of the differences between those departments. But what you find is that at the collegiate level, there's a lot of overlap and there's a lot of interdisciplinary, integrated learning. And you see that manifest amongst the majors. And so what's important to understand is that there are departmental differences both in the content of the experience and the competitiveness of each of those prospective majors. And so when we're talking about the content of experience, that might not be as important to many of the prospective students, but it is important as it relates to how do you build your story. And then, of course, for many prospective students, the competitiveness of those prospective majors is very important to them. And so I just provided a few examples here on the slide. You'll see at many institutions that there's a major called biology, and then there's a major called biology and society, and they might also have a major called public health. And they're all different, and they have different varying degrees of competitiveness and focuses. And it would be important if you were to build a compelling intellectual story that you would have a general idea of the differences and then be able to make a strategic, intentional, purposeful decision about which one you're going to build your story around because it intersects with your interests or because the level of competitiveness of actually getting in is at the level that you are hoping to take on. You can also see the next example, anthropology versus sociology versus psychology. Oftentimes I meet students that experiences from high school clubs or programmatic experiences, they could make the case for any of those. And there's a fundamental difference between how popular psychology is versus anthropology. And I will, tell you, psychology is significantly more popular. So it's important to understand what the options are and what the differences are, because one experience, right, one club organization, I'm part of, say, Model UN, right? Well, that probably could serve as a foundation for anthropology, sociology, maybe even psychology, government, political science, right? There's lots of things it could support. And so we're trying to make sure that the students understand the departmental differences and they can make an intentional decision about the content of the experience and the competitiveness of the area. Earth and atmospheric sciences versus environment sustainability, right? One's more STEM oriented, one's more policy oriented or social science oriented. Computer science versus data science versus information science. A lot of times there used to be a more significant difference between the areas. I think you're starting to see a significant bleed. It used to be a reasonable strategy to take computer science students, turn them into data and information science students, and feel like they were moving competitiveness perspective away from the most competitive group. That's really not the case anymore. But understanding what the differences are and whether you're actually making a competitiveness move is important. Communications versus linguistics. Lots of different colleges and universities call them different things. Sometimes communications is the umbrella program over linguistics. Sometimes they're separate. Oftentimes, again, based on very similar experiences, you can make the case for both. Public policy versus crime, prison, education. A lot of times when we're doing public policy storylines, they're based upon equity and access to education or, housing, whatever it might be. And so what you find is that, at certain universities like Cornell, which has the crime prison education program, there are more specific majors that the student in theory could make the case for. And so you want to have an awareness of the different areas, eventually be able to make an intentional decision about the direction you're going. And then eventually, when it becomes time, when you look at the college universities you're applying to, you want to be able to identify the specific prospective major that your story can support. So the departmental differences, as I get back to the analogy, are really key because they serve as an academic rubric, if you will. So kind of a final point here. And that means that as an underclass student, if I know that I'm building under, say, anthropology, right? As an underclass student, that anthropology departmental description is indicating how I should investigate in the space. I can illustrate to you exactly what types of clubs you should be part of, what type of research you should do, what type of summer programs you should go to, if I know the departmental description that we're trying to build under. For seniors, it's often not about how we're going to build because the building has already been done, oftentimes unintentionally if they weren't thinking about this from a young age. Now we have to kind of go back, and sometimes this is harder, but it can still be done, where we now have to kind of look through the experiences. If we kind of go back to the last slide here, and if we were to kind of look at these experiences through the lens of, say, sociology versus the lens of anthropology, we'd position those experiences differently, right? And so the academic department serves as the rubric. And if it's an underclass student, it's going to show us how to investigate. And if it's a senior, it's going to tell us how to position the engagement within the